Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10.5 hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. Welcome to episode number 6 of the MotherWit podcast. My guest today is Jennifer Hunter Marshall. She is co-owner alongside her husband Dennis of CrossFit Garden City, which is on Long Island, just outside of New York City. They opened in 2010. She is a CrossFit Level 4 coach. There are not that many people that can say that. Jenn also teaches all the CrossFit certifications all over the country. She's also an actor. If you haven't figured it out yet, she's a super talented person. I met Jenn when she was pregnant with her second child at a workshop called The Female Athlete, which, by the way, is a great course for trainers, coaches, physical therapists, pelvic floor physical therapists, and even other healthcare providers if they have enough interest and or background in either fitness or pelvic floor health. I'll put a link to this in my show notes in case you're interested. So I wanted to bring Jenn on today to talk about two things, although we're only going to get to the first one and I'll have to bring her back on a separate episode to talk about the other topic. The first thing I wanted to do with her is have her tell her stories of having preeclampsia in both of her pregnancies. This is a really important story for people to hear. The other thing I want to talk to her about is how her coaching has evolved after taking this female athlete course, the course that we met while taking. This course is really special to me and plays a big role in the work that I'm doing. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with someone who I respect so much as an athlete and hearing what her experience has been. And for those of you who have worked with me around fitness or are considering doing so, it will definitely give you insight into what makes the way that we approach these things perhaps different from what you see kind of in the mainstream. Okay, since we're going to be talking about preeclampsia today, I want to give you guys some information about preeclampsia so that it's not hard to take in as Jenn tells her story. Okay, so preeclampsia is high blood pressure. Generally speaking, we use the numbers 140/90, and it's high blood pressure that occurs after 20 weeks gestation. The symptoms that can accompany, but not always accompany, preeclampsia include headache, visual changes, heartburn or nausea and vomiting, chest pain, difficulty breathing, and swelling in the face or hands. Now, Jenn is going to mention swelling in her legs, and I just want to point out that sometimes when people are getting really swollen and postpartum, legs can be swollen, but isolated leg swelling is not a symptom of preeclampsia. It used to be, but it got removed from the criteria because it is simply too non-specific of a symptom. But taken in conjunction with all sorts of other things, we do sometimes see leg swelling. It affects about 2 to 8% of pregnant and postpartum people. It's important to note that birth is not the cure, right? It can be part of the cure when somebody develops it during pregnancy, but this is a pet peeve of mine because it makes us forget about postpartum preeclampsia. Also important is to note that Black women get preeclampsia at higher rates than white women. So just for your reference, Black women tend to get preeclampsia about 3.2% of pregnancies, Hispanic women 2.9%, and white people 1.8%. Final note here, socioeconomic status has little effect on these rates, which highlights the role of structural racism, okay? Lastly, I do want to point out that 7% of maternal deaths are attributed to hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. This is a big deal, and this is part of why I do what I do, we can prevent maternal mortality, especially maternal mortality that occurs in the postpartum period. A gentle reminder that nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care. Jenn, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So, okay, we met while you were pregnant. We were at the female athlete course, and you and I connected to kind of like talk on the side offline because you had some goals during your second pregnancy that were based on what happened with your first. Can you just share your story of your first pregnancy into the second and all of that for some background for people?
Yeah. So my first pregnancy, well, first off, we had struggled with infertility. So like 5 to 7 years of like making the rounds and 5 failed IVF treatments. And then we finally got pregnant with my first, and everything was like fine once we got through all of that. And then I had some issues with my blood pressure. And then at 34 weeks, and even before that, because I'll preface this, I'm over 40 when I was pregnant. So I was already labeled, advanced maternal age or geriatric pregnancy. So there was already like stuff going on behind the scenes.
Love that terminology, right?
Oh, great. So, but I trusted my doctor. I had a female OBGYN who I loved, and being a woman of color, she was also a woman of color. So there was I felt like I was in the circle of trust. Not that I couldn't have done well with anybody else, but she did say before I even got to the 34 weeks that because of my age, they were going to induce me early. Mm-hmm. This was my first pregnancy. And I didn't think anything of it. I just was clueless about that because I spent all of my time trying to get pregnant. I didn't put any focus on like what was going to happen at the end. And I do CrossFit and I'm fit, and just I'll get pregnant and everything will work itself out. I'm going to have a natural birth, whatever I thought that was at the time. Had no clue, knew nothing. I just I trusted that it was going to be all right. So I had a scare with my blood pressure at one point before 34 weeks, and then it went up again. And it was, I was like 33 in a couple of days, and they had me in the hospital and they released me, and they said, we're going to try to get to 36 weeks. It was like a goal.
So did they put you on medication at that point?
They hadn't put me on medication, only when I was in the hospital. So when I was in the hospital, they had me hooked up, monitoring, and got my blood pressure down, and then said, if your blood pressure goes up, you come back in. And so I was home, they released me, and I was home for I think a day and a half, and my blood pressure went back up, and they said, come in. And then I didn't go back home again.
Just for frame of reference, do you remember how high your blood pressure was? Like, what are we talking about here?
It was like I was in the 140, 145-ish range at that time. And nobody had mentioned preeclampsia at that point. Like I thought gestational diabetes was going to be my issue because I've always struggled with my A1C. Not that I was high, but I was like, have a family history, and doctors have been looking at it. So I never thought, because I worked, and now I know that that's not related to my normal blood pressure. But
you had an IVF pregnancy. Yes. You were over 40. Mm-hmm. You were a Black woman. And mm-hmm. at that point, no one had said the words preeclampsia to you, like even in an educational way of like, this is something we look out for?
Not in a way that I remember it being something I need to be concerned about. It was very like, not until it happened did I realize this was like serious. Yeah. And so I went back in the hospital. This was like a Friday, and they tried to induce. This was Memorial Day weekend too, of course. So that's crazy. This is 2017. So this is my first. So he's 4.5 years old now. And they said, we're going to try to induce you at this point, because that's the only way to cure the preeclampsia, what they told me. And still, I wasn't told that I had preeclampsia. It was just, they had concerns. And I was like, okay. And then running out these tests. And I just felt like I wasn't part of the process in any way. And I had like a shadow doctor at the time, like one of my clients who was an OBGYN as well, who had privileges at the hospital, I was like talking to her about what was happening, and she was like checking behind the scenes, and she's like, well, they're checking your urine for like the protein and all these things. And I was like, okay. And she was giving me advice, like tell them or ask them if they'll do the folio balloon thing. And I was like, okay. And I had to push to even ask for that. My doctor wasn't there at the time. I had like an attending who was oh so happy to be there. And like it was the most painful thing, couldn't even get it in. And
So now we're talking about your induction and the method to be induced. And so you asked for what's called a Foley balloon, which is when they insert a little rubber tube and blow up a balloon into the cervix to try to mechanically dilate the cervix. So that's what you preferred as your method of induction?
yes, to have an option. Like they give me Cytotec at that time, and I was having some contractions, but I never felt them. And so this was last resort. They were going to bring in the anesthesiologist to do all of that business. And the doctor that was there, like she looked in or was like evaluating my cervix. She's like, I'm being generous. It's saying like, you're not even like one. And I was like, oh, okay. And the part that was so disheartening is he was in position. He was face down, like there was nothing else other than that. And so the doctor came in and like, this is happening, that I'm going to have this section. And I was like, oh, and scary.
Were they wanting to do a C-section because your blood pressure just was getting worse and other parts of the preeclampsia were getting clinically worse? Or did they just say, we've given you enough time and nothing's happening?
I honestly, Tanya, I try to like go back and rack my brain because my husband, it was like a whirlwind. I don't remember any of that. I just remember like it was time. I was there for 2 days and we're doing like I went on a Friday night. He was born Sunday morning.
Okay, so they were at it for a good 48 hours trying.
Trying, and then it felt like, okay, but still I didn't understand the how dangerous it was. I still didn't get like the push, I guess. And on top of that, we had a member of our gym who had passed away during childbirth. And so throughout that pregnancy, my second, you have that. It was something different. It wasn't preeclampsia. I don't want to like go into too much detail, but I had that close experience to me, and then this was happening. And then I remember telling my husband, like, because I thought that I was not going to survive this the way it was going down. And so I was like, I remember distinctly, I don't know why I remember this out of everything else, telling my husband not to give our son away. Thinking that something was bad was going to happen to me. And because it was so quick, they come in, they whisk you into the room, and it was like bright lights and like, don't move, they're going to stick a needle in your back, because it was like emergency, like going into it. And I just was totally divorced from the whole experience. And then he was out. What I could tell, I was so out of it. He was fine. He was whisked away to the NICU because he was 34 weeks. But I think I remember him cry, but I never got skin to skin, never got to hold him. And then my blood pressure was an issue. Like they were working on me. And I was in like the boots where they give you, I forget what it is.
They're
that they
called
give.
SCD boots. They're like pumping to keep your blood flowing in a way to help prevent blood clots.
Catheter, all of that stuff, laid up in the bed. And I'm in one hospital, my child is in the other. It's Memorial Day weekend. So I didn't see him for like a day because I couldn't, I'm laid up, and then I had to wait for somebody to wheel me over there to go see him. Thankfully, he was a strong 34 weeker. So that was good. And I still didn't know that I had preeclampsia. I wasn't told that that's what it was. But everybody's like, it's fine, you're alive, the baby's healthy, that we're all good. So I was in the hospital for 4 days, and I had to manage my blood pressure afterwards. And I remember seeing a cardiologist because we knew we wanted to have another child. And so when he was a year old, I got my heart evaluated, everything was fine, and I got clearance to go again. But this time I was like, you know what? I want to try to have a natural or vaginal birth, as natural as possible, knowing that anytime you have any drugs or anything that's not natural, but it could be a vaginal birth. And I took, what did I take? Anthony Lowe's course. That's where I met you, on the encouragement and insistence of my friend Melissa Reed, who's a PT, and she's a CrossFit level 4 trainer as well, and had been through 3 C-sections. So she was postpartum with her third, and she's like, "You got to take this course." I'm like, "Okay." And I think I was like 7 months pregnant at that time. And was I 7? I mean, it had been 6 months. I was big.
You were very pregnant, but I can't quite remember how pregnant.
I was wobbling around there, but other stories, because then at that time, I mean, I hadn't done anything to prepare myself. I was just like, I think I want to do this. And I think we spoke, because I knew you were a midwife, and I was trying to figure out like if that's the route I should go. But I have issues because I'm a prior section and I'm older, and the preeclampsia that I had, I was concerned if I switched hospitals or doctors, I just was worried. And we talked, and I settled on a doula. So I hired a doula, Janelyn, who's still a dear friend who was so helpful. And I had a choice. She was not as experienced at that time, and she'd never done a VBAC.
Well, one of the things that I always say about doulas is when I have clients who I recommend a doula to, which I basically would recommend that everyone have a doula, but in that conversation, I'm mindful about people's finances. And one of the things I tell people, I may have said this to you too, is listen, it's okay to get a really inexperienced doula as long as you've got a provider or a team that's willing to teach her things, right? Because all it takes is someone wanting to be there and support you, and a good teacher, and it can go a long way.
But that's why I took, because I had the choice. She was a friend of one of our members, and I had reached out to another from one of the places he recommended, I think, and she was in like the Bronx or something. So there was that distance. She was far away, and she was more, not that you're worried about price, but in my phone interactions with her, it wasn't as like warm. I actually met Janelyn in person, and it just felt like I would be taken care of. And her background, even though she was new to it at that time, I mean, she'd had other births, not the VBAC, but she was willing and was very available, like anytime I needed her. So she was the one that's like, go to the doctor, because when I got pregnant with the second one, she'd already scheduled my C-section. Like, we'll go ask her about doing a VBAC. And I asked her, and my doctor was like, well, we'll try. I was like, okay, but no, like, how does that happen? She's basically said, if your blood pressure stays under control, then we'll see. I'm still going to induce you though.
Okay.
And I'm a small woman. I'm 5'1", and my son was born 5'5", which was big for like a preemie. And so I still didn't have a reason for why we wanted to go early, other than the baby will be bigger. And like that, but women, I've seen smaller women than me have babies, fine.
Some of it is about the advanced maternal age, these words I love so much. There's definitely some data that's decent that says that the rate of stillbirth increases if you go too far. But, nothing's like a light switch. And so it's really confusing. And we have to, have an ongoing conversation with our clients. And that is what doesn't happen in our current healthcare system. We're just handed a rule and an order and told this is how it's happening. And we leave people wondering why. And most people kind of just comply, right? And that's how you were with your first pregnancy. With your second, you were much more questioning, I think.
Right. I asked about things. And I think we talked once, and you said, hey, are you planning on having any more kids? And I was like, I think this is it. And you're like, well, if you have another section, that's fine. It's like, if it happens to go that route, because I was, wanted to avoid it just because of recovery and just it's major surgery. And I'm still like, feel like I struggle with like the last one, but she had scheduled me for a section at 37 weeks. And my doula, Jenn, was like, well,
So I'm just pausing the conversation here to chime in for a little context about what I said to Jen, because I have a funny feeling some people listening are going like, why'd you say that? So I just want to clarify. So sometimes when I'm counseling people, and you guys are getting the super short version, or helping people decide what path is right for them, one of the things that I think is important to look at so that someone can make sense out of whatever situation ends up being their reality is asking them how many children they intend to have. Because every C-section we have actually becomes more risky. So if somebody who was planning a VBAC told me that they intended to have a third baby, or especially if they intended to have more than that, that would nudge me a little bit further in the direction of let's do everything we can to get this vaginal birth. Now, I'm not Jen's provider. I wasn't Jen's provider, and I had little say. So in the context of this conversation, my goal was to provide a little bit of solace for her should she have a repeat section. Of course, I didn't know what was going to happen at that time. Anyway, just thought that little detail might be helpful.
Hold on a second. You're being, not that she said you're being set up for a section, but you might not be ready at 37 weeks. Like you didn't, it's my second, but I didn't go into labor with my first. So
Right.
the fact that my body had never gone through that process, and like from what I understand, this has been told to me, that your first, not always, takes longer to get going. So this is essentially like my first that I was trying to do. And then I'm getting a shortened window of like when for this to happen.
Yeah, I mean,
And
37 weeks isn't even really full term, except when a baby decides to come at 37 weeks, right? But when we make a baby come because we induce someone, that's still basically preterm, which is why typically we use 39 weeks when we're inducing somebody for quote unquote medical reasons. And even then, your chances of having gone into labor or not, it's kind of hit or miss at 39 weeks. Many people go into labor in their 39th or 40th week. That's when the majority of babies are born. So what she was saying, I think, is like, there's a little bit of sabotage going on here. But
we'll see. She's like, well, maybe you will go early. We'll see what happens. So I did have one scare with my blood pressure, but the second time around with like Janelyn, she's an aromatherapist as well. So I had my oils and breathing techniques, and just to keep myself relaxed as much as possible. And I never had to stay overnight for like blood pressure. I went in one time because I was monitoring my blood pressure because it was high, but it came down and then it was fine. Something happened, I think, with scheduling, and then somehow they rescheduled my section for 39 weeks.
Oh, interesting.
So I think it was 30, it was like 39, it was like in the middle, right before like the 40. And so, because my daughter ended up being born 39 and 6 was there in terms of the calendar. So Janelyn, like, that's good. Like we have that's better. And I was like, okay. And doing my squats and trying to get everything moving again. Like my son, she was in position. She was big though. I remember the maternal fetal wellness doctor, every time we went in for imaging, it's like her stomach is really big. I was like, is that a bad thing? What's going on? He's like, no, she's just a big baby. I was like, okay.
And how big was she when she was born?
8'14".
Okay, 8'14" is not little.
I'm like 5'1". I'm not too big. And so what happened? So Janelyn came, she met us at the hospital. They put me in the room. They were going to induce me. So I went in for my induction date, and they wanted to put, per my shadow doc and others that I talked to, like get the Foley balloon, get that in to help. So, because I knew I couldn't get the side attack this time because of the previous section, so I wasn't going to get as much help with that. And I knew the first time how painful it was. They couldn't get it in. And so this time I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to make this work. And it's not an easy procedure. I wanted to try so badly. Somehow we got in. And I was like, thank God.
Well, your cervix might have been a tiny bit more open this time because you were only a day away from your due date. So your body had time to do some of the preparatory work. And you were a little bit dilated the first time, so that may have helped also.
Yeah. So they got in and they put me on what did they give me? The anesthesiologist came in because they, just in case I ended up having to go into a section, they want you hooked up so it's easier to.
So are you saying they put in your catheter in your back, but they didn't put any medicine in?
They put the medicine, they put in to help with the back pain, like the pain, because I was having, because I started having contractions that were painful because they broke my, I think they did break my water too at that time. Did they break my water? I can't remember now if that happened. I remember water came out. There was something happened that didn't have a natural. So we had that, and I was in there for 2 days, 48 hours, or close to 40 hours around that time. Just, moving around. I'm still thinking this is going to happen. My doula's there, my husband. I still hadn't come up with a name for my daughter. My mother had been campaigning for months for the name Hope. And just because she was doing it, I didn't want it. And then, but we wanted an H name. It was a crazy scene. So they're like checking on me. And I think in the end, I only got 5 centimeters. Okay. And the doctor is like, okay, we're going to go do the section now. And I was like,
okay, so why did they want to do this one? Had you been 5 centimeters for a very long time and they said you're not making any more progress, or were there other concerns?
At that time, it was just that wasn't making any more progress. I didn't think, and the baby was big, because all throughout the last pregnancy, because what happened with the first, they were checking my urine throughout. So I was doing that all of the time. So it didn't seem, and my doula and I have talked about it, Monday morning quarterbacking it after the fact. Like, we don't remember anything about my blood pressure was fine. So the only thing that I can come up with is it's like time. Like I wasn't moving any further. One of my friends who later on in the story, I feel like saved my life. She's a labor and delivery nurse. She was at the hospital with my first. It was still checking in. I have all these my team of shadow people say, like, pushing for them to do something else. Like, she felt like every avenue might not have been exhausted to make sure that I had the vaginal birth. But, in that moment, you're just like, well, I just want to make sure my baby's okay. And still, I knew that I had the previous situation. So I get wheeled in, disappointed, just like devastated that I have to have this again. And this C-section, the first C-section, I was out of it completely. This time, I swear to goodness, Tanya, that I don't think they gave me enough pain medication, because I felt everything. Mm-hmm. I just withering and like yelling at them. I was like, this is not good. Like, and they're like, you need to relax. I'm like, relax. I not to be too graphic for the listeners, but I felt like I was being ripped apart. And I was like, I should not be feeling this, like stressed out. And I wonder now, even later, if just feeling that pain jacked my blood pressure up, because it was
pain will absolutely do that, but it's a question of where the story goes. I think I vaguely remember some details, so I suspect the story still.
Story. So yeah, it was so painful, and there was like Beyonce playing. I was like, what is happening? It was not my music, but I kept saying fudge, 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 fudge. I remember saying that and just like trying to relax. And the woman, I think she was the anesthesiologist, she was off to my left. She's like, why do you keep saying fudge? And I was like, because I don't want my daughter's first word to be fuck. Like, this is unbelievable. I mean, I wrote a one-woman piece. I'm an actor too, about this experience, because then I hear the doctor, on the other side of the curtain saying, "Oh, Jenny, she's so chubby," and I was like, "What?" And she wasn't even out yet. Like, so I was like, "What is happening?" And then the tugging, and then she's out, and then she's still big, and then they take her, hear her cry. I still haven't seen her, and then they're like working on me, and I just remember like somebody punching you through your vagina up to your throat. That's what it felt like when they put everything back in. I was like, oh my God, it was the worst. And then they didn't have a room to put me in. I was in like a recovery like hallway, and just I think then I had some spike in my blood pressure, but they didn't say it wasn't preeclampsia or anything out of the ordinary. I had major surgery at that time, but they had me in the boots again, and I had the catheter. Finally got to my room, and they wheeled her in. So I didn't get the skin to skin, didn't get to hold her again, same thing. And now I mean, you can't second guess. That's what I wanted to do. But if I had gone ahead and said, okay, I want to just have the section, I could have maybe organized a better, not organized, but had that skin to skin in that time, because it wouldn't have been so scary, I guess, but I don't know. But I had to try.
I know you can't help but think like the what if part of it. But here's the thing, like you shouldn't have to think these thoughts. You weren't having an emergency. You know, if they did a C-section, just because you were 5 centimeters and you'd been that way for a long time and they didn't believe you were going to get any farther, okay, fair. But there's still no emergency. And there is a big push in hospitals to do what we call gentle cesareans. And that can involve a number of different things, but it, you know, it can mean a clear drape. It can mean taking down the drape so that the birthing person can help take the baby out of their own body. I mean, there's all different ways that these situations unfold, but you shouldn't have to second guess, oh, if I had just had a scheduled C-section, I could have made this other part better. You deserved to try to have this baby vaginally, and you deserved this part too.
Yeah, so that's the tough part. But 2 years out, I'm in a better space than I was. But the scary part of the story is what happened later. So she was brought into the room. She was fine, big, beautiful baby. I was like, wow. I think my doula did say to me, he's like, Jen, if you had somehow managed to push her out, you would have been ripped up. But anyway, that's what she said, because she was so big. She's like, you're so little.
We hope you're enjoying the Mother Wit podcast. If you are, please rate us and leave a review in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Thanks so much. Now, back to the show.
Hope was born, and we were in the hospital for 4 days, and then the trying to nurse and all of that stuff that goes on, like I had with my first was tongue tied, so I pumped, and he had breast milk, but he couldn't latch. And then my first, she was good, but then the push in the hospital to right away, like I was like, I need help. You could never get a leg. That's another story, but anyway. We're there for 4 days. We get discharged. And I went through, with my first C-section, I was given Oxycontin, just a few, like when I left, because you were split open. I couldn't even stand up. Now this time I have a 2-year-old and a newborn, and I had another section, and I have to like move around when I get home. It wasn't my doctor. Another doctor was discharging me that day. 4 days, comes in, gives me my paper. We're gonna give this for you to take, and some extra strength Tylenol. And I was like, what? I was like, last time I was here, I got like, no, we changed the policy. This is all you get. And I was like, oh man. And anyway, so
I'd have to game out the past and the timing, but I'm going to guess you had your second baby in the midst of the media frenzy around the opioid crisis.
yes. That's right. And I get screwed. I was like, I'm not, I just need like, and they don't give you a lot of, it's not something, I don't know. I think I still had issue with it. It wasn't my doctor either. My doctor was like, fine. I had to like throw away the last 2. You get 8 pills, like to use an emergency. I was like, I can't even like stand up. So anyway, we get through that. I get home, and I had major surgery, so I wasn't too alarmed, but my feet started to swell. And with both pregnancies, like getting pregnant was a problem for me. Giving birth, also a problem. But pregnancy was like great. Never had any swelling, gained, the appropriate amount of weight, felt good throughout both of them. But then I had the feet swelling after my second. And I called my doctor, and she's like, just put your feet up. I sent her a picture of my feet. They look like, Fred Flintstone or, a hobbit. And she was like, that's normal. Just put your feet up. I was like, okay. No blurry vision, no headache, no nothing. I'm checking my blood pressure. I had my discharge paper. If I think it was 140/80, call your doctor. So about 10, let's say like 9:30, 10 o'clock, I'm checking my pressure. And I was like creeping up, if not at 140 over like 75. And I'm like, ooh, okay. Not it said in the paper 140 over 80, but I guess I'm okay. And then I took it again and I was like 140 over 85. And I called my doctor and it went to her service or voicemail. I hadn't heard back from her. And I'm sitting there and I took it again and it had gone up more. So I think I was like 150, 90, something like that. And then one of my members, who's a labor and delivery nurse that I talked about, was somebody who was like a go-between, who was on my team, unofficial team that I had. She just happened to text me to check on me that night. And I told her, I was like, hey, Renee, this is going on. She's like, well, just sit still for a while, take a breath and take it again. And I took it again and it gone up more.
Right. So now
And
you've seen a trend. You've taken it 4 times, and every single time it's higher than the time before.
yeah. And I hadn't heard back from the doctor yet, but I know, it takes time because she's a busy practice too. And so then my friend Renee was like, this is what I want you to do. You're going to go back to the labor and delivery floor and have them admit you. And I was like, what? I feel fine. I like just my blood pressure. I don't want to be. She's like, no, this is what you're going to do. Because I think at this time it had gone up even more. It was, I can't remember exactly where I ended off before I got there. I just remember when I got there, like the top number. So my husband, now he's got like a new 4-day-old baby and a 2-year-old, and my mother had just gotten into town. It was like passed out in the chair. So he takes me to the hospital and drops me off there and says, I can't leave your mother alone with the babies. So go in if it's not a big deal, because he wasn't even worried at this time. It's like, you'll get checked out and either I'll come back and pick you up or we'll figure out an Uber or something like that. And I'm like, okay, I'm freaking out a little bit. Because also in between this time, Serena Williams had her daughter and all the stuff that had gone on with her. So I got that in my head. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know what I had was a thing. So
yeah, wait, I have to clarify real quick. Because you explicitly said something when you were telling the story of your first birth about the doctor saying delivery is the cure. And I'm a little neurotic about not using that language because of the existence of postpartum preeclampsia. Like, I understand that when somebody's pregnant, delivery is part of the cure, but that makes us put on blinders to the idea of postpartum preeclampsia. So at this point in your life, that preeclampsia during pregnancy is a thing, but did you know that preeclampsia postpartum existed?
I did not know, or at least my ignorance, perhaps, like not knowing about it, but I didn't have that on my radar.
You're not allowed to blame yourself for this. It was
Okay.
somebody's job to share this information with you.
So thankful for like the people that I had looking out. I had like angels everywhere. So I get in there and I go up to the floor. And first of all, I had to convince them that I needed to be there because they're like, are you pregnant? I was like, no, I just left here this morning. Like, I haven't been at home because it's the labor and delivery floor and I'm not pregnant, but that's where I am. And so they finally, I was like, no, my friend Renee, and thank God that because she was beloved and respected at the hospital, they knew her. And I think she may even called ahead to this person's coming because she wasn't at the hospital anymore. And so the nurses though, like, oh, Renee, they took me back and they do like the triage, they do the workup, and my blood pressure was up more. I believe as high as was 200 over 100, something like that. And they were trying to like push it down. And then they ended up putting me back in the boots, the magnesium or whatever it was that they gave me when I was in the hospital 4 days ago.
Put you back on the magnesium sulfate, and they started all the things. They were probably pushing other medications to lower your blood pressure, all kinds of stuff.
And so at that point, I said to the nurse, because they're back in and out looking at me, and I'm like, well, I feel bad. Like, I don't feel bad. Like, I wasn't, going to come in. And one nurse said to me, like, honey, if you had waited till you felt something, you'd have stroked and you could be like gone. And then that's when it hit me. I was like, holy shit. That's when I got scared. And I think that's was the most traumatizing part of the whole experience, because then I was readmitted and I was back in the exact same room that I'd been in. The nurses came in the next day and they're like, "You're back." And I was like, "Yeah." The hard thing for me was because I had been discharged and my daughter had been discharged, she couldn't come back in with me unless I had somebody else to stay with her, because they don't have the staff to take, because she's another patient at that time, at that point. So I was like, okay, so that was difficult. So I'm in there and they're trying to figure out what to do with my blood pressure. So I have postpartum preeclampsia, which I didn't know they can kill you, because, and I can see why, because you go home and if you don't know to look out for it, or you just get into your normal routine, like, oh, I just had a baby, I had a C-section, I'm tired, my feet are swelled because I had major surgery, and it's just fine. And if I did not have my friend Renee insisting that I go, where would I be? So that's the story. And then was in the hospital for another week to get that
It was
under
a
control.
whole week, huh?
It was just short of a week, I think, because then they had to bring in the cardiologist team, and I felt like a guinea pig. So all of them and the residents came in staring at me and trying to figure out. And I'm like, "You've not seen this before." So, so it went through that whole bit, and then yeah, I got home, and then I was just scared of my own shadow pretty much in terms of like the blood pressure stuff. So I've been monitoring my blood pressure for months and taking medication. Thankfully, I was not switched over to, but I got a cardiologist. I think he was recommended to me. He was a younger cardiologist, and he had the foresight to like give me the ability to wean myself off the medication. So I wasn't on it. He's like, okay, we'll check it. If it's up here, then maybe you take this much. If not, so I was like, okay. And I see a functional medicine doctor and have for years. And when I talked to him about it, he was like, well, that's great, because usually they just make you stay on the stuff. And so he's like, we want to get you off of that. So eventually I was able to get off the medication and then start to rehab myself. I couldn't even think about like what to do from the surgery and just getting back, making that connection with my body again, because I was so just afraid, I guess is the best word to use, from the whole experience. And I still feel like that both of those births, it's been challenge for me to build that, have the type of I love my kids, my babies, of course, but I feel like it's been a challenging bonding for me because of just how their first breaths are coming into the world, how it all went down. It was a scary and traumatic time. And so I try not to focus on that too much, but I carry that with me. And, I wouldn't call it like the baby blues or something like that, but I definitely had something that was going on.
I think
That fitness.
I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, especially the dramatic word I'm going to say, but it sounds like you experienced trauma in both of your births. And it sounds like really valid trauma to me.
Mhm. It is, Tanya. I that's the only way to describe it. And I think it's because of the type of person I am that always pushes through and like tries to find the bright side of things, is the only reason why I try not to label that way. Because I don't know, my mind is that like falling into victimhood or woe is me. But then I think like, well, if not me, then who? Like I went through this because I was strong enough. I'm not saying anybody else wouldn't be strong enough, but I was able to. I had a good support team behind me, in front of me, beside me, like the whole time. And just thankful to God that I survived it. But clearly pregnancy was, that was, my body just didn't tolerate. I don't know. Like it's I think one of the thoughts that I had when we struggled after we got pregnant, and the years of struggling with infertility, was that a sign? Was it just maybe I wasn't supposed to, because of the tempting fate, because body didn't want to do that because it knew something that stress on me was going to do that. But I always felt like I'm strong, I'm capable, I do CrossFit, I can.
Well, I think that is one of the biggest challenges for athletes when it comes to pregnancy, right? Because you can rationalize away that getting pregnant doesn't have anything to do with how strong or weak you are, but how you cope through every day of pregnancy and a labor. We tend to attach a ton of meaning to as to whether or not we're good at it, and it's part of our physical body, and so somehow it just feels all related. In the first episode of the show, I talked a little bit about how when I decided I wanted to be a midwife, I kept it a secret until I pulled off, in air quotes, my perfect birth, because I didn't somehow feel worthy of being a midwife if I couldn't do it myself. That's ridiculous. And I know that now. But that's my version in my experience of the ways in which I connected birth to my body, to some form of athleticism, right? I mean, it's ridiculous, but we do this, and our brains are always seeking to connect experiences.
Which I have like something to add. So when I wrote, it was very cathartic. So I'm an artist too. I wrote a one-woman piece. Maybe I'll put it out there one day, but just about my second birth, like the comedy and the drama and just everything around it. And speaking to my teacher who I work with, who's an amazing solo artist, and we talked about it at length, and she brought up, I don't know where it's from. She's very like connected to the earth, like I call her Mother Goddess. And she said that sometimes you had your idea of the birth that you wanted to have, but think of like a baby having their own idea. Like they are going to be birthed, however they're going to come to the world. Somehow that gave me peace. Like I was trying to control so much of it, but I couldn't. And to let that go, and I don't have the story quite right, how she shared it, but somehow that gave me a tremendous amount of peace. And like she chose her way, he chose their way in some respects, how they were going to come.
Well, it's a version of saying that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, and any other expression that you can come up with in terms of like how we as humans manage to find inner strength in some of the craziest times. And we just continue as humans, as a species, to overcome and overcome and overcome. It doesn't mean that when we pare down to like someone's individual story, that it's not deeply painful or traumatic, but the healing that comes out of the whole thing. I have no doubt that your two stories have, how do I say this? You have, I know it without you even telling the stories, you have impacted hundreds, if not more, people because of your experience, your sharing of your experience, whether it's here or in all the other venues that you share, or it's at the gym and the way in which you interact with people and advocate for them. I have no doubt that this has ripple effects that are so much bigger than you. And I hope that some of your healing comes from what you can give other people.
Absolutely. I do think, and again, I try not to push or like, because my story can sound scary, especially to somebody who's new and to it, that I try not to like say it that way. I just try to give people information so they can make decisions about what they want to do. And so it's not telling, but helping somehow.
Yeah, leading people to resources, I think, is the key. But, so much of your story really has impacted the work that I do. And I think you see that from time to time. Because when you talk about your shadow team, I really love that language you use, because you had a shadow doctor, you had a shadow nurse, you had a shadow, your doula was not a shadow, she was real, but you had these various people, I guess in some weird way. Yeah, you had this team put together to kind of be your head check in the face of the medical system. And what I'm trying to do, and why your story is so important to me, is I want to take this process out of the shadows. It shouldn't have been the case that you had to get, quote, lucky and have, quote, angels in order to survive your births. It should be part of the system. It should be accessible. And so, I walk that fine line every day. How much do I tell someone, right? Because one day a patient says to me, I wish someone had told me X, Y, Z. This is something that I lose sleep over because I can see myself saying too much sometimes in an effort to avoid somebody later on saying, I wish someone had told me this. But at the same time, we have to roll out these bits of education calmly over time, well before someone's having symptoms so that they can recognize them when they have them, all this stuff.
Yeah, but it's important to have that. And then people, I know I definitely recommend people have a doula or midwife, like just consider it. If not a midwife, if they're not ready to go that route, like a doula for sure. And see a pelvic floor PT. Like that was also tremendously helpful to me.
Yeah.
And I have like several I consider friends that I saw throughout and continue to stay in touch with and have helped me tremendously like get back into fitness, make sure you just like want to know that you're okay. And that's
Jenn, there's a whole other episode I wanted to do with you, and I know you have to teach a class in like 5 minutes, so we're not going to get to do that. But will you come back on and talk to me about your physical recovery from your births and your use of pelvic floor PT and how all of that has impacted the way you coach people through the perinatal period?
absolutely. I would love to come back.
Because I was actually really excited to have you be potentially the first person I talked fitness with on this show, but I'm happy to delay it, and maybe you won't be the first anymore, but you are somebody that I really want to talk to about this because we shared a journey, I think, to a new way of thinking and some new information when it comes to fitness in the perinatal period. And I don't have too many people I can talk to about that. And I respect you as an athlete, as an artist, and I'm so grateful that you came on to tell your story. I hope that your sharing this story in such a public venue gives some people information before they need it and then saves their life.
Yeah. And again, don't demonize my doctor was great. I just felt like, you have so many people you have to see.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that I have a lot of compassion for the doctors and what they have to do. And but we can share the load, right? Between the doctors, the midwives, and the doulas, and make sure that we take care of the mommies the best way we can.
You just hit it on the head. That's what it's all about. It's about teamwork and acknowledging where we end and another professional begins. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I'll be back.
I can't wait. There's so much more I want to talk to you about. All right, Jenn, go teach your class. Thank you so much for your openness.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Bye, Tanya.
Bye. Everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit Podcast. You know I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started Mother Wit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.